19-year-old Ezra McCandless shows up on the doorstep of a dairy farmer's house. She's bloody, her clothes are torn, and she's covered in mud.
Yeah, she's injured. Her mouth has kind of got some blood around it. Her clothes are all torn.
Okay, and she's by herself?
She's by herself. She walked to my house here just recently.
A few hours earlier, Ezra McCandless and the two men in her complicated love triangle are seen on police dashcam. But now, she appears confused and disoriented.
What's your name, ma'am?
Police can't get any details from McCandless during a hospital interview.
So just so I remember correctly, you guys were no arguments going on at the house. You guys mutually got into your car. Mm-hmm. You started to drive someplace, and as soon as you started to drive, you, as you put it, everything goes fuzzy at that point.
Yeah.
And then you're found a couple hours later wandering around in Menominee, but you have no idea how you got there. You're covered in mud.
Detectives from the Eau Claire Police Department head back to the scene to retrace McCandless's steps and talk to the farmer who called 911.
A lot of it didn't make sense, like where she was coming from or how she got out here. And that was kind of what he was confused about too, it seemed, is she was a bloody mess and she had cuts in her pants and it didn't make sense where she came from.
But while talking to the farmer, detectives find an eerie clue.
As we're walking back on the edge of the road, we continually see footprints in the mud, and upon cresting one of the hills there, we could see Ezra's car stuck in the mud. We could see debris around the car, and we could see Alex Woodworth hanging outside the car. Because you could see the tire tracks going in, the footprints coming out, and knowing that he's been missing for almost a day, it wasn't a good feeling. I mean, we're hoping that we're going to find him alive, but part of you had to think that he may be deceased.
Alex Woodworth has been stabbed 16 times. The crime scene is bloody and brutal.
Alex Woodworth was found in the rear driver's side wheel well with part of his body hanging outside of the car. Also found inside the car was Alex's blood and a little bit of Ezra's blood.
Ezra McCandless's twisted tale becomes a homicide investigation.
She didn't tell us her side of the story until we revealed that we had located her vehicle and located Alex. She showed me the boy that was carved into her arm.
Ezra wasn't always known as Ezra McCandless. Her birth name was Monica Carlin.
As she described through adolescence, she kind of just went through, I guess you could say, just kind of finding herself, just kind of finding her gender identity.
She says she changed to a more gender-neutral Ezra.
She had the word boy carved into her forearm, and she has mentioned in the past that Alex would call her boy as a reference to her gender identity that she's gone back and forth, but he would do it in a way that almost derogatory. He would call her his boy, my boy, and he knew that she didn't like it.
She described where she had other injuries.
But the evidence is not adding up in Ezra McCandless's story.
You look at the injuries in themselves. You start with the boy. You know, she originally told me that Alex was the one that carved that in her arm. He did it as he was in the driver's seat and basically reached over and grabbed her arm, held it still, and carved boy. The issue with that is boy was written as if it was from her right side, with the B being up by the elbow going down her arm. So as far as the wounds to her hand, she was telling me she got those by grabbing the knife blade. And if she would grab the knife blade and use force to pull it away from Alex, like she said, the wounds on her hands would have been deep. She would have needed stitches. The ones on her hands didn't even need a Band-Aid.
If it's really a struggle, you're moving quickly. They're going to be quick cuts. They're going to be random. They're going to be in odd places. They're not going to be targeted spots on your hand that someone could inflict themselves with easy access.
And then later, I was able to see the photos on her right leg, and those two were, she said it took place when Alex was trying to cut her pants off, Well, if someone's trying to cut your pants off, you're not going to lay perfectly still. You're going to be kicking, you're going to be moving your leg. But these knife wounds and scratches were straight lines. There was no zigzag to them. There was no start and stop and then start again in a row. And the interesting part was they were all at arm's length. If she was holding the knife and put her arm straight down, they would have been right there on her leg.
Evidence at the crime scene also doesn't add up. McCandless tells police it was Alex Woodworth who attacked her in the back of the car.
The story that it happened in the back seat wasn't consistent because there was a pool of blood outside of the car. There was a trail of blood leading away from the car. There was evidence of a struggle in the muddy ground nearby. And so things weren't consistent.
Forensic evidence also shows Alex Woodworth suffered the first stab wound to the back of the head and very little defensive wounds. The tragic reality that he was ambushed and taken by surprise.
Alex's phone was found a little ways away from the muddy driveway, the field entrance, and it was found in two pieces where the battery, I believe, had been removed and the phone had been discarded away from that.
Alex's only means of possibly getting help or being found is literally shattered.
And it wasn't just a crack, it was smashed. Anyone that's ever really smashed their phone knows you drop it, you really have to throw it, and especially nowadays when phones are so indestructible. It's very hard to smash a phone like that unintentionally.
Also found at the crime scene, the bloody knife.
The knife was found by Don's house in the ditch line.
The same knife that Ezra McCandless claims Alex attacked her with. According to police, Ezra suffered superficial wounds, while Alex was stabbed 16 times. The question investigators now have to answer: is it self-defense or cold-blooded murder?
Especially once I heard that Alex was stabbed that many times. And during the interview and talking with her about where she stabbed him, with the first one being in the head and then the throat and in the groin, she would have had a chance to get away from him at that point, but she didn't.
County 911, what's the address of the emergency?
Somebody attacked her and she needs a doctor. Her clothes are all torn.
It's the scariest thing I've ever experienced in my life because I've never ever fought back in my whole life. I didn't know what to do.
Her mouth is kind of got some blood around it.
Absolutely a sexual relationship. And that on its own was described as almost a BDSM relationship, very out of the norm.
A lot of it didn't make sense. She was a bloody mess and she had cuts in her pants and it didn't make sense where she came from.
I'm trying so hard in my head trying to get things to come to me, but it's just like it keeps getting blocked out and blocked out and blocked out.
She didn't remember where it happened.
Do you have any idea who did this to you?
Sex and Murder. New season, Sunday night at 10 on HLN.
When your numbers are